to The Explainer. We're about to tackle one of the toughest questions out there, a question that usually comes from a place of real pain. Why do bad things happen? Well, the source material we're digging into today offers a pretty direct and maybe surprising answer.
It's a question that just hangs in the air during those moments of grief or confusion, right? When something terrible happens, we're all just desperate for an explanation. And more often than not, our questions all seem to point in one direction, toward God. And that line of thinking, it usually leads us down one of two paths. The first is that, God must be causing the suffering directly. The second, which is probably more common, is the idea that even if God isn't the one doing it, he's at least allowing it to happen. It makes sense, right? If God is all-powerful, why wouldn't he step in and stop it?
But what if that whole question, that entire framework, is just built on a misunderstanding? The source material we're looking at makes a really bold claim here. It argues that this question doesn't come from a deep knowledge of God at all. Instead, it comes from a bunch of, flawed assumptions.
So this brings us right to the heart of the matter, the idea of a misunderstood God. The argument is that a lot of us, maybe without even realizing it, have kind of pieced together our idea of God from all these different, scattered, and sometimes even contradictory bits of information.
And this quote from the book of Job, it just nails this idea. Think about it. Job loses everything, his family, his health, his money, and after all that, he confronts God. And what he realizes is that his entire understanding of God was just based on hearsay, on what other people had told him. It wasn't until he had that direct, raw, painful encounter that he felt like he finally saw God for who he really is.
This is a perfect picture of what the source material calls a patchwork theology, right? You take a snippet from a TV preacher, maybe a personal experience you had, something a friend said, you throw in a few Bible verses pulled out of context, and you stitch it all together. And what do you get? A picture of God that's often really confusing and, frankly, full of contradictions.
Okay, so if we're saying God isn't to blame for evil, then where does it come from? Well, according to this perspective, the scriptures point to a totally different source, one that interestingly enough takes God completely out of the picture. And the book of James is incredibly direct about this. It just draws a line in the sand, period. God and evil, fundamentally incompatible. And here's the key idea. If God himself cannot be tempted by evil, then there's no way he can be the source of temptation for anyone else.
Then, the scripture lays out the super specific process, almost like a formula, for how evil actually happens. And you'll notice it's a cycle that starts inside us. It kicks off with a person's own desire. That desire, when it's given into, conceives and becomes sin. And the final tragic outcome of that whole cycle? Death.
And this is the absolute key takeaway. In this whole detailed breakdown of where evil comes from, notice who's missing? God. He's not mentioned at all. And that's not some accident or oversight. That is the point. The whole process is described as being entirely human-driven. It all starts with our own desires. So this leads to a really powerful analogy, one that kind of shines a light on why this misunderstanding might be so common. And it all comes down to how we approach learning about God versus how we approach, pretty much any other important subject. Just think about it for a second. To become a doctor, you have to commit to years of intense, deliberate, systematic study. You wouldn't let a surgeon operate on you if they just, casually scrolled through a few WebMD articles, right? Of course not. And yet, when it comes to understanding God, our approach is often so much more casual. It's like a verse of the day on an app, a gut feeling we have. We're just relying on these scattered bits and pieces. So the proposed solution is pretty straightforward. It's about approaching the study of God with the same level of seriousness and dedication we'd give to any other vital field of knowledge. It means putting in a deliberate, systematic effort, not just a casual hit-or-miss one. And here's the thing. This kind of diligent, systematic study doesn't just give you more facts. It's supposed to lead to a single, central revelation. And that revelation is presented as the ultimate answer to this whole problem of evil. And that revelation is something called Christology. The argument is actually really simple. You can't truly study God without studying Jesus Christ. They're presented as one and the same. If you want to know God, you have to look at Jesus. And why is that? Because Jesus is the perfect, living, walking, talking explanation of God. Now, this little shift in perspective, it changes everything. The question isn't some vague philosophical mystery about an abstract God anymore. Instead, it becomes incredibly specific and personal. Is this something Jesus would do? All of a sudden, you have a real, concrete person in history whose life and actions you can actually look at to find your answer. And when you actually do that, when you look at the life of Jesus, a really clear pattern starts to show up. He healed people who were sick. Well, that tells you God isn't the author of sickness. He raised people from the dead, which shows God is the author of life, not death. He calmed storms, suggesting God isn't the one causing natural disasters. I mean, in every single instance, his actions point toward restoration and life and healing, never toward destruction.
This leads us to what is presented as the final, definitive word on the matter, a statement from Jesus himself. And the argument here is that this isn't just some nice, poetic phrase. No, it's a theological cornerstone. The idea is that Jesus is the exact representation of God. So if you want to know what God is like, how God acts, what God's character is, the answer is simple. Look at Jesus.
So here we are, right back where we started, but now we're looking at it through a completely new lens. That original question, why does God allow bad things to happen? Well, it gets reframed. It's seen as a question based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who God even is. Because when you see God through the life and actions of Jesus, the source argues, the question itself, it just starts to dissolve. It's not answered with some complicated philosophical theory, it's answered with a person.